Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last week of English 200, 201, and 202. You guys have been a fabulous class. I know it's hard to be in a class in the summertime, but if you did enjoy this and you want to take this class again, it is repeatable. If you are in English 200, if you take it a second time, it's called English 201, Intermediate Creative Writing, and you can take it a third time in English 202, which is Advanced Creative Writing. I'll be teaching this class again in the fall at Napa Valley College in person. So if you're around and you want to take this class and really get, a whole semester's worth, the summer was pretty intense. We had to shorten it a lot. But if you want a real workshop experience and time in the classroom, the class is offered on Mondays and Wednesdays from 12:30 to 1:45. And it's going to be a great workshop. There's still a couple spots left, so email me if you have any questions, but I would love to see you guys again. All right, this week we are going to do our last week of fiction, and then you are going to be turning in your portfolios, your final portfolios. So in creative writing, instead of having a final, your final is to revise your work significantly and to create a portfolio of work. And I'll talk more about that at the end of the lecture. But essentially what you need to know is your portfolio is worth kind of like the amount that your grade, your final would be worth in this class. It's worth 100 points. So it's definitely what you want to spend the majority of your time on this week. And we don't have a formal assignment, just journal exercises on writing fiction. And then hopefully all of this will lead you to writing an awesome story that if you want feedback on, before you turn it in for your final portfolio on Sunday, you can email it to me by Friday, and I will give you comments and on Saturday so you can work on revising it for turning it in on Sunday. Okay, that was a long addendum. To start off this week, please read chapter 9 and 10. These chapters are on plot and point of view and voice in fiction, and that's in our textbook, Serious Daring. So what is plot? Plot is the arrangement or sequence of events, a chain reaction where one event leads to another and where the author makes decisions about what to include or omit and what order in which the events will be introduced. So it's basically the structure of the story, how things happen. There always needs to be a because, the reasons that connect the events of a plot. Usually there is a conflict involved, which involves the protagonist, the main character. And it's an obstacle that keeps a character from what he or she wants or desires. Short stories usually have one conflict. If you're really, really clever, you can pull off two, but you just really want to try to start writing a short story with a single conflict. Complications, the various turning points and sub-conflicts in a story. This is what's keeping the protagonist from being able to achieve his or her goal. When you're writing fiction, remember that the first draft is really just for finding out what your story is about. When you go back in a second and third draft, that's when you start figuring out, oh, is this the right order of events that I want to happen? Does this conflict work? This is where you ask hard questions about how to rearrange the actual narrative structure of your story. So a story can start in three possible places. It can start an existing storyline or set of events from life. It can be an initial situation from which you work forward, or a stunning or concluding situation from which you work backward. These are great starting points. You've probably heard of the term in medias res, right, in the middle of things. That's a real common place for some stories to start. A lot of thrillers or action movies will start that way with like a guy hanging from the cliff and you're like, how did he get there, A, and B, how's he going to get out of this, right? So you're immediately drawn to the situation. Now, not all stories need to start that way. You can just start from the beginning and work towards the end. Or you can start with the end and work to the beginning, right? This is the diagram of a shape of a story. All stories begin with some sort of exposition, right? They set the scene. This is where you set the scene. Where does the story take place? When does the story take place? You introduce the main characters, and then you introduce some sort of inciting incident. What happens to make us see what the main character desires more than anything? What's the setup for the conflict? Then there's a rising action. This is when all of the complications or barriers occur for the protagonist trying to get what he or she desires, okay? The climax is the turning point in the story. That's when the actual conflict happens, and it's the main climactic event. And then from that action, there's a following action, like what are the reactions from that event? And then in the resolution, it's the aftermath. So what happens based on the big conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist, right? How does it end? And sometimes it sums up, right? Sometimes it's the protagonist finally gets what he or she wants and all is well, or it can be the exact opposite, right? Not all stories have to end happily. In fact, it's almost better when they don't. Chronology is when you follow a linear time-based structure when you write a story. So you follow, so if you're writing about a single day, you would start with the morning and you would end with the night. So this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. There are a lot of other alternatives. And you'll see many of these listed in your book. One famous one is a frame device, and that's like a story within a story. So if anyone's ever seen the movie, The Never-Ending Story, right? It's about this young boy who finds this book in a bookshop and locks himself away reading it. And so that's the frame. But the real movie is about the story that happens in his head while he's reading. And so that becomes the real adventure. You also see that in the movie The Princess Bride, if you guys have seen that. If you haven't, it's a great movie. That's a frame device. Flashbacks are used when a character remembers something from his or her past, right? Flash forwards are when something from the future is revealed. Braided narrative is where you'll have one point of view and then you'll switch to another point of view, paragraph by paragraph. Or you can write in short vignettes, right? Like little tiny mini chapters within a short story that are named. Or you can reverse your chronology, start from the end and then work backwards, right? There's a lot of different options. I tend to recommend, if you're writing some of your first short stories in this class, start with an easy chronology, a linear time-based structure, right? And maybe try to use a flashback or two, right? So just see what it feels like. All right, today we're going to start by doing a few little exercises. The first one is called the skeleton, and that's where you're going to be you're going to write a story. You're going to write a linear story in which a strong main character is on a quest for something important and specific. The object is a given. Don't explain its importance. The main character starts acting immediately. She then meets a specific obstacle. Finally, she triumphs over the obstacle by means of a magic or supernatural element that comes from the outside. You may introduce minor characters, but the narrative should never abandon your main character. So the main character is always the center of the story. This is kind of like how fairy tales are told, or quests, like the superhero stories. The story should really be told through action and dialogue, and the limit is 500 words. Okay, so it's really important that you just make it 500 words. And I'm going to tell you what the importance of this exercise, why we're doing it. So kind of like a medical student, you need to learn the names and locations of the human bones before you go into the more complex systems, right? So if you were going to become a doctor, you wouldn't just learn the entire human body, right away. A beginning writer really has to be able to control basic plot before moving on to more subtle elements like motivation, subtext, and ambiguity, right? Many of the greatest novels incorporate a quest. So this is like the main way. So if you think of Star Wars, that is a quest, right? There is a main character that has to go through several obstacles in order to achieve a goal. You may have read Moby Dick before. That's a quest. Or Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. That's a quest. These works are also, they concentrate on one protagonist. And they end, if not happily, at least on an emotionally satisfying note of resolution. Okay? So this is what I'd like you to try. I'd like you to try to write a quest with a main character that achieves, some big goal, right? And it doesn't have to be, you guys don't feel like you have to write fantasy. You don't have to set it in the Renaissance. You don't have to set it in, Elizabethan times. You can just write about right now, right? And give me a strong main character. Tell me everything, use everything you learned last week and put that character on a quest. All right. The next thing you're going to do is a exercise called From Situation to Plot. So this is, the idea of this is, in a few sentences, you want to create a specific character in a specific situation. And you want to complicate his life with opposing forces and alternatives within that situation. Ask, given the situation, what would my character want? What would my character do? How would he act or react? How will those actions propel the story toward a point of crisis and a final resolution? What I want you to do is to practice creating characters involved with specific situations. Then outline little mini plots for how you would complicate their situation and move them toward an ending. I want you to keep that outline really brief, and I want you to do 3 of them, okay? And the reason why we're doing it, so these are just like 2-sentence examples, and no, you can't use the same character that you used in the first exercise, okay? The objective of this is to understand how the most effective plots are those driven by character. That's why we worked on character last week. To see how a character within any given situation creates his or her own destiny, okay? So for these, you're going to write 3 different ones, and each will be a couple sentences long, okay? But I want you to really think about what is the character's desire and what is keeping him or her from that, and how does he or she react to that, okay? Fine. This is one of my favorites, okay? This is called the story machine. So for this one, and hopefully you'll watch this lecture, because some people, I'll know if you're not watching this lecture because I'm not posting this as part of this list as part of your journal assignments. Okay, so a lot of beginning writers just kind of feel like there's nothing to write about. You probably are feeling that way. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm writing so much, I have nothing to write about at this point. Okay. Or, maybe you're like, oh my gosh, all stories have already been told. There's nothing I can do. So the story machine is meant to break you of that feeling, okay? So the way that you can do that is juxtapose. So what it does is it's going to juxtapose 2 really different situations, like a character in a situation that don't really match up, okay? So what you're going to do is you are going to choose one vocation from list A. So you're going to either choose Apple Genius bar worker, a drug dealer, a first grade teacher, a hairdresser, a truck driver, a ship captain, or a high school speech and debate champion, okay? And then you're going to choose one strange behavior from list B, okay? and try to be weird. Try to choose the one that least matches up to the one you've chosen, the vocation you've chosen. The person in A could either be doing an audition for a cooking show, or setting his or her parakeet free, or folding 1,000 paper cranes, or tuning his or her piano, or beginning to work in a homeless shelter, or trying hot yoga, or going geocaching. If you don't know what that is, you can Google it, okay? Then you want to supply a motive for this strange behavior. You want to supply a setting and a conflict that might be resolved by this behavior. Imagine a scene prior to the final scene that demonstrates the severity of the conflict. Imagine a scene that demonstrates that initial difficulty. Okay? So, retrograde plotting is often a revelation to the beginning writer. Okay? The idea of plotting something out is really hard. Okay? And especially when you're staring off into space and being like, oh my gosh, what am I going to write about? So writing toward a conclusion for some writers is easier than exploring the consequences of an imagined premise. One more easily discovers the beginning of things if one knows the ending, okay? So the whole point of this, right, is that it requires these labels that give you insights into the rudiments of these characters, right? You know something about these characters because of what they do with their lives, right? And they suggest some sort of, education level, some sort of socioeconomic status, right? And you're going to use that information to write about how this person deals with this thing that he or she is doing, right? And what conflict arises. Remember, the conflict is what stands between him or her and his or her desire, okay? So this one, I want you to make it at least 250 to 500 words. Okay. The other thing we're thinking about this week is point of view, and that's the perspective from which a story is told. A lot of people write mainly in first-person narrator. That's told from the perspective of a character, and you use I. I went to the store. I bought some milk, and it really, it is like storytelling, and it's really good for a strong protagonist. There's a couple different versions of this. There's the peripheral first-person narrator. That's someone who takes a voyeuristic tone because he or she isn't the center of the story, but watches the narrative unfold from the sidelines. So if you've ever read The Great Gatsby, you'll recognize that Nick is the main character, right? And he tells the story of Gatsby. Nick is not the main character, but he's telling the story of the main character, Gatsby. You can have multiple first-person limited. That's told from multiple character perspectives, but each in the first person. This is more common in a novel, and a really great example of this is Louise Erdrich's novel, Love Medicine. And it can be done in a short story with little tiny vignettes, but it's really hard to pull off. Third-person narrator. This is an outside voice that refers to all characters as he or she. The objective third-person narrator describes what's going on in front of them with detail but without interpretation. The third-person omnipotent point of view. This is like a godlike narrator that can see into the minds and hearts of every character. Or there's the third person limited omnipotent, and that's someone who can see into the hearts and minds of one character. The second person narrator is really uncommon, and it directly addresses the reader with you, right? So what you saw when you read Citizen, right? Usually this is done either in a epistolary, like a story told through letters, or a dear reader. Use the second person where the reader's addressed directly. So we're going to practice using point of view with a couple of exercises. The first one is for Journal 21. You're going to practice point of view by writing two separate versions of the same event. This is, you're going to think about an engagement party or a baby shower. And if that doesn't work for you, just let me know and we can find you a different situation. But I want you to first write it in the first person. Write the scene in the first person. And then, so with an I narrator who's deeply involved in the event, like the mother of the groom-to-be or the soon-to-be grandma, right? Someone who's like totally in it. And then use the third person and use it as, like, use the perspective of someone who's not intimately involved in the scene. I want you to, you're writing about the same exact scene. I want you to notice how the fictional shadows fall differently in each section, okay? It's very, very different than if you're on the inside than if you're on the outside. So the objective of this is you should be able to present a narrative without nudging the reader or in any way explaining what she is, what you've written, right? The narrative should speak for itself. And using, sorry, I'm totally, so the narrative should always think for itself. But you want to feel easy. So in order to practice that, you need to feel really easy in both the first and third person, and understand how the story plays out differently if you choose one over the other. So, and what problems potentially arise. So for this exercise, I'd like you to write 500 words. Okay, 2 pages. You're going to describe the scene. 1 page is going to be from one perspective. The other page will be from the other perspective. All right, last journals are 22A and 22B. The first one is you're going to use the present tense and you're going to write an early memory of your own in the first person. This should be something that happened before you were 7 years old. I want you to only use the words and perceptions appropriate to a young child. The memory should be encapsulated in a short period of time, no more than an hour or so, and should happen in one place. Don't interpret or analyze, simply report it as you would a dream. You know, this happened, then this happened. When you can't remember details, make them up, and you may heighten the narrative so long as you remain faithful to the meaning of the memory, the reason you recalled it in the first place. So the reason why we do this one, this should be 500 words, so 2 pages long. You want the narrative in this case to speak for itself, okay? And if you use a child's voice, you're really forced not to analyze, but to merely tell the story unembellished, okay? So give that a shot. And then 22B is an early memory part 2. And so now you're going to go back to that same memory, and you're going to tell it from the vantage point of who you are today. That is, you're going to inject adult vocabulary, insight, subtlety, and comprehension, okay? Change the way the incident is told without alerting its structure or meaning. Use the past tense, but keep it in a first-person narrative. And it needs to be no more than 500 words, okay? It can be 1 to 2 pages. The reason why we're doing this is the idea is to empower you, right, with the knowledge that you control this material and not the other way around. A lot of beginning writers don't realize that you are in control. There are countless ways to tell the same story, and each way says something a little different, not only about what happened, but also about the teller and how the teller feels about the situation. You're the first and you're the last authority. Your power, at least in this realm, is unlimited. So wield it well. Use your powers. Okay, so that is the end of our fiction exercises. I know this is a lot, but you guys, you signed up for a summer class and we have to pack it all in 6 weeks. So after you've done your journal entries, and I really highly encourage you to get them done early this week. I will say that in the email, but who knows, hopefully you'll read it. If you have questions, as always, reach out to me and I will respond back to you, okay? The final portfolio. This is due this Sunday at 11:59 p.m. For English 200, if you're enrolled in English 200, you need to create a document that has a cover with some sort of artwork on the cover, and a title that is appropriate to the collection of work that you're showing us. I want you to think about the title, because remember, the title is your first chance to really talk to me about your portfolio. Then you're going to write an introduction of at least 500 words where you talk about your growth as a writer over the semester. What did you learn? What are your pieces about? How did you change them? How did you improve them? What kind of revisions did you do? And then you're also going to include one poem, one creative nonfiction piece, and one fiction piece. Your poem should be one of the poems that you wrote as a formal poem. There's two choices. If you do not like those poems, you need to contact me immediately and get feedback on another poem that you wrote for this class. But you cannot use something that you have not gotten feedback from me on. Same thing with creative nonfiction, only you need to expand your piece as well to 500 or 1,000 words. It needs to be significantly revised. You will be graded on how much work you put into these revisions. And the same thing with the fiction piece. I will be providing you feedback by early this week on your last week's fiction. And you will need to, if you want to use something from this week instead, you need to send it to me, like I said in the lecture, before Friday so that I can give you feedback by Saturday. If you're in English 201 or 202, you will do the same thing. You'll create a cover and a title. You'll write an introduction. This time that's 1,000 words that talks about the work as a whole and your growth as a writer over the course of the semester. Then in yours, you're going to give us 6 to 8 significantly revised texts that represent all 3 genres. Now you might be saying, I didn't turn in 6 to 8 formal assignments. Guess what that means? That means you need to send me anything you'd like comments back on. You need to get comments back from me on these works before you revise them. So you should immediately do some sort of inventory, see what you want to work on. Whichever journal entry felt good for you, you want to turn it in. And you do need to represent all 3 genres, but there's no requirement on how many from each genre. You could do maybe really, really like creative nonfiction and you want to do mostly those and just stick in one poem and one short story, or vice versa. Maybe you were like totally into poetry, right? So you're going to give me 4 poems and 1 creative nonfiction and 1 fiction, okay? If you have questions about this, it's worth 100 points. It's worth a lot of your grade. If you don't turn this in, you will not pass this class. So make sure you turn it in on time, okay? If you have questions, reach out to me. Send me an email. All right, guys, it's been a pleasure working with you. I really, really enjoyed reading your writing, and I do hope you continue on reading and writing all of these genres of creative writing. Again, if you're interested in taking English 201 or 202 in the fall, please sign up. I would love to have you in your class. I would love to have you in my class. All right, have a great day, and I'll see you guys online.